Happy holidays from Digication Scholars Conversations. I'm your host, Jeff Yan. This week, we will be sharing the second of two special episodes featuring former students of Laurie Pierce from DePaul University. If you haven't heard our conversation with Professor Pierce, please listen to episodes 7 and 8 of the podcast. Our conversation today is with Jack McNeil, a graduate of DePaul University, who is now the Director of Digital Media at the Illinois Senate Democratic Fund. More links and information about today's conversation can be found on Digication's Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Full episodes of Digication Scholars Conversations can be found on YouTube or your favorite podcast app. Hello, Jack.
Hey.
Jack McNeil, welcome to the Digication Scholars Conversation. I am so glad to be talking with you again today. Jack, you and I met in early September, actually, when I had reached out to you because I had found your work on your Digication site, and and it was something that I was really thrilled to see. It was about the state of the justice system, and you had done some really in-depth research as well as your own personal involvement in um, sort of the how one could get black prosecutors to be part of the justice system to sort of level things out a little bit. So having seen that, I reached out to you, and then subsequently uh, you had introduced me and had talked about your professor Laurie Pierce, and I had since also talked to her, uh, and that's I had learned so much from her and was so inspired. So um, I thought that it would be great to touch base with you again because you sort of started this, and and so how about you want to tell us a little bit about yourself? And you graduated in 2019 from DePaul University.
Yep.
Want to tell us a little bit about what you were studying there? I know that you majored in a couple of majors and so on.
Yeah,
So why don't you talk about that?
absolutely. Well, thanks for having me on. I've never been on the show like this before, quite like this. So it's an honor to be here. Yeah, I guess I graduated last year at DePaul, and I grew up in Moline, Illinois, which is Western Illinois, right on the river. I kind of grew up around politics, was involved. Remember meeting then Senator, Barack Obama, a very young age, and being very inspired. Kind of reading his book now, hearing all these local players from Rock Island and all these towns that are neighboring to me. So kind of getting to witness that history up close, was always very interested in politics. Got involved a little bit in high school, went to DePaul because I wanted to kind of work and be in school at the same time. I wasn't fully interested in the kind of Big Ten experience. I wanted to dive into what Chicago politics was, a little bit more into applying research into everyday life in a practical term, and just be around people, get some experiences. So I went to Chicago and kind of dove into the political scene, working on a governor's race, traveling around the state, doing videos and photos and social media work, as well as starting to run the College Democrats at DePaul, and then also statewide. So for Illinois, traveling to different conventions, meeting people across the country, and hopping kind of from one campaign to the next. Ended up doing a mayoral's race as well, doing same thing, video, photos, and doing some freelance work. And then my major in school was political science, of course, just kind of baseline level, and had discovered junior year, I took a class, an ABD class, so African and Black Diaspora Studies, and really it was just fully eye-opening class. I don't think I'd ever been taught Black history through K through 12 at all, or well, for sure. We have a tendency to skip through in a linear fashion. We had slavery, then we didn't. We had MLK, and then now everything's good. Like, it's a very much a one to the next, and you don't learn about the backlash, and you don't learn about the complexities or the varying ideologies within any of these movements that actually built the society we have today. And so I think that was an eye-opening class. It was like the Harlem Renaissance, and it was exploring artists as well as connecting to political movements and seeing how art is usually a reflection of the conditions that people live in a certain time, and seeing how race is deeply involved with that. And so I just started taking more of those classes. I found it super interesting and relevant to what I was witnessing around me in the post-Trump era, having him won in 2016, as well as locally with things like Kim Foxx, a state's attorney, who I do delve into with my project, as well as other obviously issues going on in Chicago at that time. Laquan McDonald, that cover up, the building tensions in the city, a mayoral race coming, and there's actually a docu series called City So Real that kind of covers Chicago politics very well, on National Geographic. It was just put out actually, and it covers from Laquan McDonald through the mayoral race. And I think it does a very good job showing, honestly, the political tensions and coalitions in the city in a way that I think Chicago is often misrepresented in national media. So it's a very long-winded way to say that I found a kind of area of study and interest that I couldn't get enough of. It came late, granted, junior year, but the last year and a half, I tried to take as many of those classes and ended up in Professor Pierce's class for a capstone, and that is where the project came about, connecting the issues that we're talking about in the classroom to my other passion interest, politics, and coming up with a project looking at Black prosecutors being elected, reform-minded prosecutors, and how to connect the dots between some of the movements we see, as well as the conversations and new politicians being elected in office to try to, I guess, untangle mass incarceration and some of these other rather damaging systems that we have today.
Jack, you're just incredibly impressive. I'm not sure if I know too many people who have been so
Mm.
accomplished, especially as an undergraduate, sort of involved yourself in diving into the community and having all these very meaningful jobs and involvements with the community. So first, thank you for that. I wish more of us do this.
Appreciate it.
Um, and but there are a couple of things that I just got out of
Yeah.
that really is fascinating. Uh, One I would say is you actually mentioned it maybe a couple of times on connecting the
Hmm.
dots. It seems to be a big theme in your
Yeah.
life. You're making connections from your early lives and being part of sort of a Obama, in the Obama era, or maybe even before he
Yeah.
became a national, an internationally known person, probably at the local politics level. I know that he was a community organizer even when he was younger. Um, and then, connecting all of that with post-Trump sort of presidency and now it's I guess post-Trump.
Right. A double bump.
Well, we'll see
Yeah.
how that all goes. But all of that is it's really interesting because you mentioned how you've been sort of making connections with your real
Mhm.
life and how it impacts your real life and the people around you and what's going on. I think that's a that's a really important part of learning that a lot of maybe perhaps a lot of your classmates wouldn't get. Um, I know you probably know people as well as just as I do who go to school and a lot of what they do don't seem to connect to the real world.
Yeah.
And yours seems to be almost the complete opposite. It's almost starts from the real world. What would you think about that?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of truth to that. I mean, I do recognize that a lot of people probably cannot afford to I mean, I let's be real, a lot of our schooling is aimed at very directly to a job after school, right? So a lot of people may not have that discovery period of what they're really interested in, so they're training themselves to fit into a very specific, job description or whatnot. But for those that I think have obvious passions, and a lot of people don't develop obvious passions until maybe even after college too. And so that's another piece of this. But yeah, I think that's right. Growing up, my mom was a journalist, and she was always telling me to kind of question things and question authority, and those things kind of imprinted in me too. Really try to be as practical and honest about what I'm hearing in classrooms and connecting to real world. I guess I didn't like to I felt waste time. I guess I'm a bit impatient sometimes in classrooms like that. So I try to, okay, well, let's get to the point, or how does this actually apply to real life, or let's debate this. How what you're saying is great. That's great in the abstract. How is it actually being applied right now in this modern context, and what's going wrong, and why can't we question it? So I think I always think about things like that when I'm hearing them in a classroom, and I do think that the benefit of, I'm not trying to sell DePaul, but the benefit of going to a school in a place, and every place has this. I mean, you got people running for office, every local level, there's always a way to get involved. But I would tell people that, really going to somewhere that allows you to have a wide array of experiences. If you want to get involved in a nonprofit organization, direct services for homeless populations, there's Chicago Coalition for the Homeless. There are organizations to get involved. If you want to get involved with electoral politics, there's organizations for that. And so I think forcing people to kind of step out of that comfort zone to thinking that, the classrooms are just meant to be learning these and memorizing these ideas versus that's fine. We can memorize these ideas, but how are the ideas actually being pushed at a local level or a state level or a national level? And how are they, imprinting our everyday life? I think people are seeing the role of government very clearly in COVID, in this response, and then also in what people are able or not able to do right now. They're seeing local politics play a role that they haven't seen visibly probably in their whole life. And I hope that, everything. I hope that one of the only positives that could possibly come out of this is that people decide to get involved more and apply what they're learning about, apply abstract theories about what justice is, or what humanity is, or what helping the vulnerable is, whether it's from a religious, political, academic context, and applying it to everyday life. And I think an event like the COVID crisis and the racial reckoning that we've had this summer is the most kind of in your face example of when you can start to apply some of these academic conversations to a actual real life context. And if we don't, then we see the parallels too of the perils of disinformation basically finding its way to take up any space that isn't already occupied. Misinformation, we can see how easy it is to split people up. And so I think I think it's incredibly important time to think about how we're actually applying theories to real life, as well as giving people the proper literacy, whether it's about theories or media literacy, to push back on things, to challenge things that they hear and they see, even in the classrooms. Because I think, talked about not having proper Black history taught K through 12. A lot of teachers right now in this moment are not equipped to be dealing with a lot of these issues around Black history, whether it's from textbooks at the state level being developed, or even how they're talking about the election, and how they're telling their students what's occurring right now. And so there's just a lot of work that needs to be done in applying, I think, the ideals that we're taught versus seeing how they come about in real life, and the impact on people every day.
I think you're so on point there. The idea of Black history, but a lot of other parts of history
Yeah.
being glossed over, based on lots of times, lots of different
Yep.
biases that comes into play. And for whatever reason, there's also things almost that feels like, hey, this is what the textbook said. This is always being covered this way.
Mhm.
And sometimes, what could have been huge lessons that we could learn is summarized in that one
Right.
line or glossed over in one little diagram, and was like, that was it,
Yeah. Oh.
and it almost feels like that there's almost an infinite amount of history that one could really dive into.
Mhm.
And for whatever reason, we've cornered ourselves and mapped out this whole thing
Mhm.
about, this is what world history looks like, this is what US history looks
Right.
like. And we must cover all these
Yep.
periods within these how many years of history that we provide, especially the K-12 level.
Yeah.
And that's like, no matter what history happened, we have to cover it. Meaning that 100 years from
Yep.
now, we still have to cover all of the same history plus the last 100
Yep.
years, in the same period of number of lessons or classes, or you know, uh, 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 number of pages of textbooks that there is.
Right.
So things would just get continuously diluted, right?
Yep.
Um, and which is why I thought when I went to see, when I discovered your portfolio, your site, I was just so excited because it was the exact opposite. You dove really
Mhm.
specifically into, I mean, I really started with that Kim Fox
Right.
page. Um, because why don't you tell us about that?
Sure.
How did you get to that? Because that's a pretty interesting story in and of itself.
Yeah, yeah. I think well, first on the history textbook thing, you just made me think of a joke I saw on Twitter that people will not even get to 2020 in 100 years from now because their textbook they'll run out of time after World War II to even get beyond that. We've always been a
Right,
classroom where okay, we ran out of time. We were hoping to cover the civil rights era or the Reagan presidency or something, but we run out of time. So I think that's a consistent theme that needs to be addressed. But on the portfolio itself, yeah. I mean, I honestly, I think she was kind of the starting point in terms of how I viewed the project. I was trying to find a way. At first, it was more of an abstract idea about just black political power in general. And then I was like, okay, let's hone down to be a little bit more specific, hone in. And, she was someone who I had my first phone bank with our college Democrat group was going to do a phone bank for her. It was a race I'd watch very closely. Again, we're talking about the dynamics of Laquan McDonald cover up. And she was coming in directly in that context to basically in essence, the groundswell was to kick out Anita Alvarez, who was that current state's attorney. She had been supported by a lot of the kind of Democratic machine in Chicago up until this election, and a lot of those, figures and the political parties actually would then switch to support the more progressive candidate Kim Fox. And so witnessing that kind of in real time, seeing the backlash that she garnered just by existing in that office, kind of the immediate pushback you see of people that are occupying spaces that they have not occupied. Again, the prosecutorial, we're looking at 95% prosecutors across the country are white. Most of them are white men. I think it's like 92%. We're talking about thousands of jurisdictions, and to have an office that is just so regularly viewed as, oh, of course, you have a white guy who runs on a tough on crime playbook, and that's just the accepted thing. And what I wanted to do in bringing her up is to tie the history of movements that have led to her, being elected. One of them, if you look at in the 60s, she now occupies an office that was once held by Ed Hanrahan, who was part of ordering the murder of Fred Hampton, right? A prominent civil rights activist in the 60s who was featured in the Trial of Chicago 7 Netflix documentary or not Netflix movie for those who, are consuming it that way. So it's just amazing to see kind of the power of, I think, representation in that office and witnessing that pushback at a local level, as well as just following kind of what she was aiming to do with the office around transparency, around changing how we view misdemeanors, getting people, reducing the population of folks that are going to jail, trying to attack mass incarceration, trying to look at these systems a little more critically into, are we actually accomplishing what we say we want to accomplish? And so I think she was leading the country in a lot of these reforms. I mean, we have a long ways to go. But I wanted to start there and then viewing her race in context to that year, 2015, 2016, a bunch of prosecutors were elected that were running on kind of a reform message that were maybe opposed by the local police union that were looking to move towards decarceration, at least at kind of lower level offenses, which was, and then that's a big shift politically. It's a huge shift of what people are looking for out of their DAs and state's attorneys. And so I thought it was worthy diving in. And then I wanted to, of course, connect it to larger movements, the kind of theories around them, and just basically the struggle to get there. And then, of course, the debate of, you have a lot of activists. It's like, you're a prosecutor, you're a cop, and there's no way to be progressive. And so trying to kind of read through the critiques of even this idea of trying to use the system to fix some of these problems, I thought was interesting. But I ultimately kind of sided on this is a good thing that we have people like Kim Fox running for office and in office, and she can make a big difference. And people across the country, Leslie Bell, say 20 or 30 probably prosecutors, likely more after this past election, have been elected on these kind of reform minded tickets. So, in my mind, it's a very real political phenomenon that is making a big difference in people's lives because at the local level, and I think President Obama has talked about this in the wake of the summer, he really focused on electing new states attorneys, district attorneys, sheriffs, and looking at cities, mayors to contract with the police unions. Like a lot of the reform can happen there between police unions, states attorneys, district attorneys, and sheriffs. And I think it's just an incredibly important conversation that needs to happen, and also I think has been happening for many years and picked up steam over the last 5 years.
Yeah, and this is I mean, you mentioned Obama again, and I'm also just I'm enjoying his book right
Yeah.
now. I just read the first few chapters. I'm almost like savoring it
Yes.
because
Hey,
it's
there's a volume two
he
coming
is
though.
hey, he is as good a writer as any
Yeah.
writers. I mean, his book, I mean, it was beautifully
Yep.
written. Um, and as you were just saying, that reminded me one of my favorite pieces I read so far was when he um, ultimately was trying to decide whether he was going to run. I think um, it was like in December of, it must have been 2007 or
Yeah.
something, and he was no 2000,
Might have
2006,
been
2007.
2006.
Yeah, probably
Yeah. Yeah.
2006. And he was because he was a bit coy before then. People asked, he wasn't sure, and he ultimately needed to get Michelle's
Yeah.
blessing, and Michelle was kind of wasn't into it
Yeah.
because it was sort of making his they know what it means, the toll that it's going to take on their family.
Yep.
And she's like, hey, things are doing pretty well, your book is doing well, we've got some money,
Right.
don't mess this thing up. And I think like with Michelle asked him, so you only wanted to run because you think you can bring something that the other Democratic candidates can't bring.
Right.
Like is that true? Like what is that? And he said, well, because if I run and I win, the day that I you know get sworn in, it would be the day where the world is look at the world and everyone in US is gonna to see this as a point in history where it is now possible
Hmm.
for someone who's black, to do this, and it gives possibilities to black, Hispanic, Asian, all the
Hmm.
kids out there that they have a chance, right?
Yeah.
And it really does make it such a what a big
Yeah.
difference. And of course, it did. He won, and it is still one of the most. I felt like 2008 was still one of the most
Hmm.
momentous uh, part of our history.
Yeah.
To see that.
Yeah. Definitely.
Um, yeah, but this idea of having this local, involvement, what I find to be extremely exciting when you talk about
Hmm.
it, Jack, is that you have clearly developed this mission in life almost. Um,
Hmm.
tell me a little bit about your current job now, because I think that there's a connection that we can make there. Um,
Yeah.
what have you done since graduating from DePaul,
Yeah.
having that opportunity
Yeah.
to have been in this excellent program? Um,
Yeah.
what happened?
Yeah, so I pretty much, after the summer looking for jobs that fit well, I jumped down to Springfield, Illinois, which is our capital city, and where they legislate. They got the capital down there, and actually, I was born there. My dad had worked there years growing up before moving. And so, I was always somewhat familiar, but and heard stories about Springfield and what went down there. And I connected with a state senator who I was a very fond of, who spent about 5 years to pass education funding reform in Illinois. Illinois had been the most inequitable state with the funding formula. Poor schools in Chicago, in rural parts of the state, downstate, even in my Western Illinois, just basic stuff that facilities didn't have. And, if you look at these systems are funded by property taxes, wealthy suburbs, mostly white, would be doing very well in and around Chicago. And the rest of the state suffers. And a lot of the city of Chicago suffers too. I mean, you have 50 schools closed in the South and West Side in 2013, massive school closures. And, unfortunately, politicians play on the division between Chicago and downstate. But you know what? The problems really are similar. Whether you're in a rural school district that's underfunded, or, a school in the South or West Side of Chicago, predominantly Black or brown, that is also underfunded for decades of disinvestment and then end up closing. And so he was from a very small town. He is from a very small town. I think he represents the smallest town of anyone in the state Senate. Senator Andy Minar, for those interested in looking a little deeper into it. He's from Bunker Hill, a town of, I think, 1,000 people, 1,200 people. And he had spent 5 years on this crusade of trying to fix the formula of education funding in Illinois. And the bill passed, made huge improvements, still a long ways to go. He'll be the first to tell anyone. But that was when he kind of got on my map. And so I found an opportunity to work as his legislative assistant. Obviously, that time was cut short because of COVID, but it was scheduling constituency calls, going to going into hearings, for example, committee hearings. And then he was chair of the appropriations committee. So, calling roll and listening to university presidents tell you why they need an increase in budget and what justifies that and all these things. So he is one of the more skilled legislators. So I was very lucky to have a spot open up with him. And then from there, I hopped over to the political side of the Senate Dems in Illinois, and I'm currently, doing their digital social media video work for kind of the in-house person to do it. So for any of the members of the Senate, obviously we just wrapped up the campaign and had a focus of about 7 to 8 of the kind of closest competitive races in the Senate. So I was working closely with those campaigns, and we won all of them. So now the majority for the Senate is not 40, now it's 41. Got an extra seat. Big agenda, but it's tough. Obviously, without any federal bill, right, with COVID, it's very difficult for a budget to be passed and planned, moving forward. So long way to go, but yeah, I definitely still working very much at the local level, and help out as many kind of local candidates as I can this past election cycle as well.
That is amazing to hear, Jack. Your parents must be pretty proud of you.
Yeah.
I think DePaul should be pretty proud of you as well.
Go
Um,
Demons.
I think that the fact that you had sort of jumped onto that and almost, I mean, your life has been so driven by this mission, um, and I kind of, I mean, it almost feels like that for you. It came built in. That's part of Jack, um, and I think that it would be interesting for people who might be listening to this to identify,
Mm.
If they are educators, their own student within their own body of, the students that they work with,
Mhm.
ones that are like you, who have this drive, who has this sort of mission in life, and giving them the opportunity to do this. But for those that don't have it, it almost feels like that's the first thing that they need to get the students to have, as opposed to just keep um, pumping them into with things in a textbook, because that's not going anywhere.
Yeah.
They're never going to make that connection. I think that they might make, I mean, they might make connections later in their life, I guess, and sometimes you just have to keep teaching them anyway.
Yeah.
But there has got to be some better ways to almost reverse the order of some of these things. Is it shouldn't be about we'll just teach you a bunch of stuff
Right.
as if the mission part, the passion part doesn't matter.
Hmm.
And then later you'll find it.
Right.
Um, that's hard. That's really almost like the wrong way of doing
Yeah.
it. Because look at you, you're unstoppable. What's next for you, Jack?
Well, I do agree. I do agree with everything that you've said, particularly around the passions and finding that, in concert with school. What is next? Well, I am planning to take the LSAT in January online, so that is a step. I was studying for a bit and then got distracted this summer and picked it back up. Leading up to the election and after it. So I have some time following the election to kind of commit to that. So that will be interesting to take it online and get through that. And I mean, ideally, I would go to law school next fall. DePaul would definitely be a top choice for me, trying to get back to the city. And of course, continue working for the Senate, and so that would be continuing to do their social media and videos and graphics and kind of what they need member to member wise, and try to do that while going through law school. I think is the kind of immediate goal. So yeah, that's kind of on the immediate horizon right now.
I'm so excited for you. I'm sure that you will do well wherever you land. I wanted to sort of go back to a couple of things that I know of of you. I think that it would be quite interesting to have you talk a little bit about the nitty gritty of how you tackle this research project that you did.
Mhm.
So this capstone project. Um, could you describe that a little bit? Maybe sort
Yeah.
of, in stages, how it came to be, and what sort of how did you structure it, and maybe what you learned from it.
Yeah, I mean, it has been a little bit of time since I did it, but I remember the process quite well because I mean, I don't think I had a project that forced me to kind of think that critically or be that specific about what I was actually trying to project and inform people of, which I think is good. I think really, and credit to Professor Pierce. I mean, she was not going to allow someone to have a sort of idea of what this is that wasn't really well thought out, because it's like, okay, what is the question that you're driving at? What are you actually trying to get across? And so I think, we spent a few weeks brainstorming and honing in on kind of that leading question. What is the actual point? What is the message that you're going to be bringing here? And that few week period, I was able to kind of hone down as specific as possible around the role of prosecutors and the role of Black prosecutors, progressive Black prosecutors. And kind of all the surrounding phenomenons that have led to the elections, and also kind of the impact, really focusing on the impact and their role in tackling mass incarceration. So I think I definitely kind of research outward, where I have a Google Docs of like 50 million different ideas and themes and concepts, and million tabs of okay, well, here's all my stuff on Kim Fox. How am I going to piece that together? Here's a paper that says you can't be a progressive prosecutor. Okay, let's read that, take some notes. And so I just try to consume as much information. I was listening to podcasts around can you be a progressive prosecutor, listening to podcasts of Kim Fox, listening to interviews. Justice in America was a great podcast. I mean, if you look at my sources on the portfolio, it's just a ton of primary and second sources, and I think that was intentional. I was trying to consume as much information about the topic, as well as just very, very practical information about who the prosecutors were, the pushback they were receiving, the policies they were enacting, and I think that naturally through Professor Pierce's process week to week, kind of forced you to organize it a little better. I mean, I definitely I tend to ramble on. I'm sure people in this conversation will be able to tell. So for me to be able to kind of differentiate, organize it in a way that makes sense was a huge piece of this as well. Because I had a lot of content and I had a lot of ideas of where to take it. And so I think probably the most important thing was the first thing, honing in on what the actual question is that you're trying to solve, or the problem you're trying to solve. And I think once that became so specific to not just prosecutors, not mass incarceration, not black political power. That's too broad for what I was going to be able to try to answer for. Specifically, black progressive prosecutors, how they're elected, the role and impact, and kind of the movements around them. And so once it got something as specific as that, and again, I mean, there just aren't that many of them across the country. So that was also in some ways helpful to both, validate sort of what I was trying to get at, but also look at, okay, in 2015 we had, X amount were elected. Why in 2015 did that occur? Right, in the wake of Black Lives Matter, in the wake of police murders by the police, basically, and cover ups with Laquan McDonald, very specifically in Chicago. And Kim Fox credits organizers to the Buy Anita campaign to help propel her victory. I don't think it's the only reason, but it's a huge, huge part of it. And so I think getting something very specific and then consuming as much information about that topic as possible was helpful to me. I had a big, long running Google Doc of everything I wanted. I'd read something, I'd highlight it, I'd be like, okay, that's a provoking question, forces you to rethink this a little bit, and then finally kind of just splitting it up into sections. Okay, this is the debate about whether someone can be a progressive prosecutor. That's relevant because someone's going to read this and be skeptical of whether that's even possible. So I got to convince that person that it's worth even engaging in that discussion, that electoral politics can be useful basically in this context. At the same time, we have to give credit to the organizations and activism of decades that led to this moment. Okay. And then also look at the power of representation, seeing all of these black prosecutors elected in 2015 and what that could mean to people going through law school or growing up to see it's possible. And that's a position that they could hold and maybe want to hold to fix things that have gone wrong. And so I think I just felt I felt it was necessary to include all of those in that because I think it all tells that story. And so the real challenge was, I think, just kind of separating out the content to kind of make sense of it, frankly. And so for someone who maybe this is their first time looking into the topic, could very easily just look at the tabs and just be like, okay, let's figure out who Kim Fox is. Interesting. How did she get elected? What are the organizers that may have helped her get elected? What do they think? What does this mean that she's even elected in the first place? And how does it relate to Black Lives Matter, protests and movements of the past few years? So it's a lot there. It's not a one size fits all by any means, but I think getting as specific as you can, having a real goal to kind of the research that you're doing, and then for me, it was just consuming just a ton of content about it and starting to separate it out from there.
I think that you had talked about, being able to almost like, you do all these research and you ask your own
Yeah.
questions. It's such an engaging way for anyone to look into, anything
Yeah.
that one is interested in. And I wish that more aspects of learning is like that, because it feels much more like this is the kind of thing that you do in your
Yeah.
after you graduate too, right?
Right.
That's what you've been doing. And having those skills, having those experiences help you do that. Otherwise, you have to basically start from scratch.
Yeah.
You would have to figure that out, after you go to school,
Right.
and that wouldn't be so good. You should have it. You should have that as an experience for
For
you,
sure.
at least, maybe more than just one, but multiple.
Yeah.
Um, and and I also really like that. I mean, by the time I consumed your website,
Yeah.
it was very well organized already at that point. So there is a translation from that um, sort of raw. I just have some
Hmm.
instincts. I'm just reading, consuming whatever that I can, and then making sense of it,
Right.
and then having to express what you made sense of
Right.
in these pages. And the organization of that is really good. I recommend people check out your site. Um, well, I think that that's your work has been so inspiring, Jack, and I hope that it all goes well with the LSAT, in January. and taking it online. And
Yeah.
I'm sure lots of people are still doing it, and I have no doubt um, in my mind that whatever happens, you'll end up doing, dedicating your life into doing really meaningful things. There's no doubt about that, and good on you on doing all these things and continuing to be an inspiration to us all.
Appreciate it.
Um,
Appreciate the kind words.
yeah, and I guess I'll touch base with you, check in with you maybe after the new year,
Yeah.
see how things go.
Yes.
You till then, study hard and take care and keep
Yeah.
safe. And hopefully we'll jump back online again, and we can catch up once you progress further.
Sounds good. Thanks again.
Okay, thanks, Jack.
Yep. I know.
The Digication Scholars Conversation Series is brought to you by Digication, a technology platform powering the most innovative ePortfolio programs in K-12 and higher education. Our website can be found at digication.com. This episode was produced by Drew Albanesius. If you enjoyed today's conversation, please like, subscribe, and share with a friend. Thanks for watching.